This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
As followers of Jesus, in whom all things were made, we acknowledge the Darug people as the traditional custodians of the country on where this podcast is recorded. We recognise their continuing connection to the land and waters and thank them for protecting this land and its ecosystems since time immemorial. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future, and we extend that respect to all First Nations peoples listening today. Warning. This episode contains descriptions of suicide and mental illness. Listener discretion is advised. And if you or someone you know needs help, Lifeline is available in Australia on 13 11 14 or lifeline.org.au.
There's no rationality to ending your life, and it's extremely sad and it's extremely difficult for everybody involved.
I'm Georgia, and welcome to Finding Hope, the podcast that reminds you of the good in the world. Each episode tells the story of someone who has found real hope in challenging times and made the world a better place. Episode 46, Lisa Gallate, Part 1. Lisa is someone well acquainted with death. More than anyone should have to be, especially at her age. Walking through so much loss has made her tender, but it's also made her strong. It's isolated her, but it's also sparked her desire to connect with others and help them through similar journeys. Lisa's written a memoir called Just Because: Love, Loss, Renewal, and it's an honour to have her on the podcast today. Let's meet her.
I'm Lisa. I'm a wife, a mother, and a lawyer and an author. So I describe myself, I guess, by all the roles that I play in my life. And I'd like to think that I'm a pretty good friend and cousin and niece and all sorts of things as well.
Wonderful. Lisa, tell me a little bit about your childhood, because I understand you grew up in New Zealand before you moved to Sydney as an adult, correct?
Yes, that's right. So I was born and raised in Wellington, capital of New Zealand, and lived for 10 plus years there, bearing the windy winds of Wellington and the awful weather that it had then, and to some extent still has now, although when I was last there very recently it was beautiful sunny weather, so it does get great days. But I was one of 4 children and fairly regular sort of mainstream childhood, attended the local primary school, had the usual sibling relationships, lots of love, some bickering, lots of love from my parents, and lots of, silly pastimes at the weekends and sport and all sorts of things that kept us occupied and out of trouble.
It sounds like a pretty quintessential Aussie kind of New Zealand childhood, quite similar between the two countries. Now, you said you were one of 4 kids, but I understand you had quite a close bond with your older sister Zoe. Can you tell me about that bond?
Yes, sure. So my sister was only just 2 years older than myself, and we spent every spare minute together. So we were thick as thieves, and she was very much my idol. So I thought the world of her and wanted to be like her. And we had lots of fun together. We went to school together. We went to dance together. We shared the same bedroom. So we had a lot of very close times together where I think she and I ultimately knew each other better than anyone else knew each of us.
The childhood that Lisa describes is one that is quintessential for many, filled with love, laughter and memories. But Lisa got her first taste of overwhelming grief when Zoe and her partner were killed in a car accident.
So I was at university. I hadn't been at university for very long, and I just got the call that I had to come home to Hawke's Bay. I was studying at Victoria University in Wellington at the time. and found out that they had had a terrible car accident only involving their car, but they had missed a corner and flown across an embankment, hit the other side, had missed the bridge, hit the other side of the embankment, and there was an old former bridge foundation still there, and the car hit that and they flipped upside down and landed in the river. And unfortunately, they were both killed instantly.
There's nothing quite like, the loss of a sibling. It's a very unique loss, not something that a lot of people have to go through, especially at such a young age. How did it affect you initially? Can you talk about those initial weeks and months?
The loss of a sibling is particularly hard because often that's a very close relationship, but it's not recognised in the same way as many others are. So parent and child, for example, is more keenly sort of noticed and felt, I think, in Western society. And to lose a sibling, quite often, as was my case, you're probably one of the closest people to the person who has died. It's a very close relationship because you're close in age, you've got very similar interests, and you're travelling through sort of same life events together. So I think it was a terrible shock. I was overwhelmed really by the shock of it. Couldn't really believe that it had happened. It was very surreal, and it was very difficult because they had been travelling in the North Island, and the accident happened some distance from my parents' home. So there was that whole issue as well about identification and recovering the bodies and getting them back to Hawke's Bay for their funerals. And I think too, it's especially hard that there were two families that were grieving as a result, as well as many friends. But also to have had a double fatality was extremely sad. And James was also, a wonderful person and a wonderful partner to my sister. So, it was very keenly felt within the community.
Yeah. One thing you talk a bit about in the book is that idea of secondary losses. And one detail I found particularly poignant and quite heartbreaking was that your parents' wedding anniversary was the day before your sister's death, and they never celebrated their anniversary again. And it's the idea of, death isn't just, one loss. It's that continual kind of idea of all these other things get lost slowly. Did you experience some of that yourself after Zoe died?
Oh, absolutely. And look, I still do, Georgia, because it's a lifetime of loss. So for anyone who has lost a loved one, it's absolutely a journey that is with you always. And whilst we may learn how to manage our grief and move forward, you've lost that person for the rest of your life. So I don't get to share my adulthood, my career ambitions, my achievements, my children, etc., with my sister or her partner James. And so those are triggering moments throughout your lifetime when you keenly feel their absence.
Lisa was broken by the death of Zoe, but her death was only the start of a series of heartbreaking losses. The second coming only a few years later, when she met her first husband, Mark.
We actually met at work. We were friends, and he left and went and joined another firm, and then we started dating. But I met him on the first day that I arrived at this law firm, and he was very prophetic in his advice to me that I should be very familiar with the rules of court. And I always remembered that. I thought it was very profound and kind to be giving me some advice. I was coming from an in-house role. So I think he was keenly aware that I needed to be reminded that there was a lot of court procedure that I had to be across.
Oh, that's so sweet. I love that. How did your kind of relationship develop?
We were very similar, I think, in a lot of respects, and so we sort of bonded very quickly as friends. We were both lawyers, both litigators, had lots of ambition, and very excited to to go overseas, do the OE travel that most Kiwis do, and I'm sure a few Australians do as well. And so we formed a great friendship, and then we started dating, and things developed very quickly. And we had a very long engagement, although we got engaged quite early. So it was a really special time that we got to share together before we got married.
What did you love most about Mark?
I think it was that he was a very genuine, interested, kind soul who had a funny, dry sense of humour, but was just super smart, but very self-effacing and very humble.
Lisa, that was, I guess, contrasted by a lot of mental health struggles on Mark's part. Was this something that you were aware of heading into your relationship, or was this something that you slowly learnt about?
I did have some insight to it from one episode, which I thought was just what they call episodic depression, where you can just have an instance of being quite depressed and then you recover and it's no longer an issue and you seem to live a full, healthy life afterwards. And I wasn't to know that there were lots of health issues for him prior to us meeting, and certainly during his teenage years, and that it was a lot more serious than I had thought it could be or was. And it developed to the point where it became very debilitating for him and ultimately for us as a young married couple.
Yeah, tell me about those challenges, because eventually you did leave Mark to get the help he needed, which I can't imagine was. I can't imagine that's one of the hardest decisions, because probably everything in you just wanted to stay and help, but to know that you couldn't be the one to help him.
It's a really invidious position to be in, because it's so hard when you love the person that you're with, you want to see them well, but after several years there was nothing that I could say or do that could convince him to follow medical treatment, to see the medical experts that were engaged to support him and look after him. And I think he was in part or fully in denial of actually how unwell he was. And ultimately, when it got to the point that my life was put at risk, that's when I kind of called Wen and had to sort of like step outside of our relationship and actually divulge what was going on and what his health issues were to my family, and they immediately wanted to protect me and said that I needed to step out of the relationship, which is what I did. And ultimately we just weren't able to reconnect and resume our marriage, because it became apparent that wasn't going to be possible. I mean, I was very conscious of trying to do all I could, which meant, one, I had to protect myself, and then secondly, I wanted him to be able to have the opportunity to rely on family and friends to support him and hopefully see to a place of wellness where we might be able to resume our marriage. And unfortunately, that isn't how it ended up.
Soon after Lisa left, Mark died by suicide, a decision that Lisa says she still doesn't have answers for, and she never will.
People still ask me why, and I don't think that anybody can ever give that answer to what I see as just a completely irrational act. There's no rationality to ending your life, and it's extremely sad and it's extremely difficult for everybody involved.
Something you did touch on in the book is the epidemic of male suicide, which is not just a problem here in Australia or in New Zealand, it's a problem globally. What do you believe is the steps that we need to take, both, individually but also collectively as a community to try and take better care of our men and boys?
I think it's a combination of things. I think we're doing some of them now really well in more recent years than we have done in the past, but I think it's still a work in progress. So I think it's really important that we have a shift in our culture to step away from thinking that boys have to be tough and strong and unemotional. I think it's really important that they understand that they have an emotional being and that they need to be able to express that and feel that, and they need to be applauded for doing that as well, and that they have the same range of emotions as girls do. And we need to support them in their family setting as they're growing and make them appreciate that they can voice those emotions. But ultimately, we've all got to be careful and supportive of them, but also respectful of the fact that we don't need to labour them either. So it's perfectly normal to have a full range of emotions, and we shouldn't sort of over focus or be too zealous about somebody being upset or sad or angry or frustrated or any of those other, really quick to anger type emotions that we might say boys shouldn't have, because they're all normal when they're in a normal range. And then I think in terms of our men, it's a very prevalent problem in our young men up to the ages of 35. And I think that we need to be encouraging our young men to be a lot more aware of their own mental health. And that means, looking after yourself and, taking all of the right steps that you see as being, important for your own emotional well-being as well as physical well-being. And I think we've in the past perhaps put too much emphasis on our physical health and not enough on our mental health. And there's been a lot of change in recent years in relation to that, and we're a lot more open to talking about it. We've just got to make sure that there's a lot more resources in the community to support people, especially post-COVID, that we can be there to nurture and support those who need that support.
By the time Lisa lost Mark, she was already a lawyer in a high-pressure job, now having to deal with 2 significant losses in her life. I was interested to know just how Lisa juggled the demands of her job with her grief, especially in those early months following Mark's death.
It's really difficult, Georgia, because I still think that this is an issue for all of us in the workplace, which is that there's an expectation that you will arrive at work happy and cheerful, and you will leave work happy and cheerful, and that there'll be no difference in between. And unfortunately, we're all complex emotional beings, and that's what makes us, superior above the whole animal kingdom, is our ability to think and process and feel. And I think I found it very difficult because I was expected to compartmentalise my grief, and I didn't really have the support or the resources available to me then as perhaps we do now. But even so, I think we are too quick as employers to pass our staff over to employee assistance programs without having regard for how we can support them in their workplace. And everybody in their lifetime, if they are working as long as I have been, and most of us are in the workforce for a long time, will experience loss, and unfortunately will often experience bereavement as well. And it's a question about how we deal with those life losses and bereavement, and how we support people in the workplace to be able to return to work, feel safe in doing that, feel comfortable in being able to share how they are feeling, and perhaps have some additional resources around them, not just an employee assistance program at the end of the phone, but meaningful additional support in the workplace that they can call on when they need to.
What do you think, what kind of support would have helped you in those early days after the losses of Zoe and Mark?
Some things I think would have been quite useful would probably to have been mentored by a more senior lawyer who could have just acted as a buddy for me and as a little bit of a guide to just take me out of the workplace environment for a coffee or just to check in and make sure that I was that I was okay. I think maybe returning to work where I maybe started back on reduced hours, or where I had some more flexibility about what hours I worked. Maybe also being able to work from home occasionally, which is, now a lot more acceptable, but wasn't some years ago. And also just perhaps also being able to have somebody who could shadow me in the event that I was working on critical time-pressing engagements like evidence or pleadings, etc. And I appreciate that there are always going to be deadlines that just have to be met. And so it would have been really good to have had that backup if it was needed, that somebody could step in and help if I needed it to get the work done. And that, I think, would have given me a lot of confidence that I could perform and meet my employers' expectations and my clients and the court and other stakeholders, their own expectations, that those deadlines could still be met.
Hearing the weariness in Lisa's voice, even as she recounts her experiences years later, makes me wish she just had a break, a little reprieve from everything, where she could just breathe. But that wasn't to be. Soon, tragedy would strike Lisa's family yet again. This time, her younger brother, Justin. Tell me about your little brother, Justin.
So my younger brother, Justin, who I called Justy, was pretty fearless right from the get-go, and was a very happy-go-lucky, gentle kid who just was so keen to play sport and just loved animals, had a great childhood, and was a very special boy in terms of his humility and his gentle nature, but he was also a great larrikin, so he was very quick to tell a joke. And there's usually always someone in the party or at the party that can whip up a good series of jokes on demand, and he was one of those. So very quick with a joke, very quick to entertain people, but very good at also telling jokes where he would poke some fun at himself, and just a real little larrikin.
Tell me about his passion for policing, because that was, well, from what I've read in the book, sounded like he was just all in. That was his whole life.
Absolutely. So he loved animals, and I think he ultimately would have loved to have been a vet, but he did lots of other things in his early years, and decided to join the police force with the hope of getting into the dog unit and or the equestrian team. So he joined the police force and ultimately moved to Christchurch and trialled for and was accepted for the dog unit. And he had an absolute ball with his dog called Sabre, who was a very fierce and scary looking Alsatian that I was never friends with. And he just absolutely loved policing, and I think it was very much his vocation. And I really applaud and commend people to find their vocation in life. And I think people who find that vocation in their work are very lucky indeed, because a lot of us work to live, and there are very few people, I think, who are fortunate enough to live to work, and he was certainly one of those.
Justin may have lived to work, but that's not all he was. He was a husband, a father of 2 young kids, and he loved his sport. A mere 2 months after becoming accredited as a police dog handler, Justin collapsed while playing weekend rugby.
He was playing hooker for his Christchurch team and collapsed in the scrum collapsed, and he had a seizure and was taken to hospital, and ultimately they found that he had a brain tumour, and it was a very aggressive form of brain cancer. He proceeded to have as much treatment as was reasonably possible, and they ultimately operated, which was very helpful for my brother to be able to continue to live and work and try to raise his young family with his wife.
How much did you know about glioblastoma before Justin was diagnosed?
Actually, probably very little, and I think that was really reflected in the fact that when my mother told me about Justin's diagnosis, she was terrified because as a nurse, she knew that the outlook would be very grave. And even as she was telling me, it was very difficult to process that this was very serious news and it was likely to be terminal.
Despite the grave outlook, Justin underwent surgery, chemotherapy, and against all odds continued to work. Justin didn't just hope that he would beat the diagnosis. He fully believed that he would.
Oh, my brother very much thought that he would be able to beat this, and he fought it all the way, and he had the full support and love of his wife and his family, and we were all very much believing and hoping that he would be able to beat it. And as an example, Georgia, I remember that we all read a book that talked to us about the experiences of others in relation to brain cancer and how some people had been able to successfully work through it and transition out of it. But, brain cancer is a funny thing because, there are some forms of brain cancer where they are able to really be quite effective with surgery and other forms of therapies. But this was not going to be the case for Justin.
Mere months later, Justin's battle came to an end. For Lisa, it was another devastating blow. She had lost yet another sibling. Was there ever a point, Lisa, where you just looked up at God and said, why? Why me? Twice. Two of my siblings, how is this fair?
Yes, sure. Look, and it is a very complex one, and I think, I'm not the first or last person that will ask these questions. I was very cynical, and I did question what was going on. But ultimately, I should say as a preface that, these tragedies didn't happen to me. They happened to the people that I'm speaking about who lost their lives so tragically and so prematurely. And unnatural and sudden deaths are probably amongst the most difficult that we all have to bear as humans, and they go against the natural order of things. But ultimately, I appreciate now that none of us know when our lives will end or how long we are blessed with, and that's why that adage of making every moment count is so true. But I remember reading a book by Harold Kushner that was written some years ago, where he was a Jewish rabbi who spoke about how there's no certainty in relation to our lifetimes, and that's not the purview of God either, and that the most that we can hope for is that we can be responsible for living our lives, not just for ourselves, but for our loved ones who have passed, and we take on their unlived years as our own responsibility to make sure that we live full lives.
I should say that you have remarried now. You have 3 beautiful children, and your oldest daughter had a visit from Justin, a vision where she actually saw a man, despite never having met him in her life. Can you explain that? Because that's just incredible to me.
It was incredible to me either. I couldn't quite believe it, but I was at home with her and my twins when they were just babies, and my daughter was only 2 years old, and wasn't aware didn't know my brother, didn't know his name, didn't know that he had passed, and just told me that she was talking to someone, and then she said to me, "Mummy, who's Justin?" And it really sort of made me quite sort of shocked and thrilled all at once. I didn't quite know what to do, and I wasn't quick enough to think of questions that I wanted her to ask on my behalf, but I just enjoyed the moment, and just kept asking her what he was doing. And then she said, oh, he's going. And I said, well, where is he going? And she said, oh, he's going down the road. And that was the end of it. So he was just leaving. He came and visited her, or she believed that he did, and it's, and I really believe that his presence was with us because she was too young to make something like that up, and she had no knowledge of who Justin was. So I really believe that there was a moment when his spirit was with us, which was really beautiful.
Thank you to Lisa Gallate for sharing her story so beautifully. The second and final part of Lisa's story will be in the next episode, where Lisa has to heartbreakingly deal with further grief, but has penned her story into a memoir for others to find comfort in and hopefully help them through their own grief. To find more information about Lisa's memoir, Just Because, visit the show notes. I'm Georgia, and thank you for listening to this episode of Finding Hope. I'd love to hear your feedback. You can rate, review and subscribe to this podcast and share it with your friends. Stories are always better when they're shared, and you never know what you can learn from another's journey. And if you or someone you know has a story of hope to share and you'd like to be interviewed for the podcast, I'd love to hear from you. You can leave a comment on the Finding Hope page at hopepodcasts.com.au. For now, I'll leave you with this verse. So with you, now is your time of grief. But I will see you again, and you will rejoice, and no one will take away your joy. John chapter 16, verse 22. Catch you next time.
This is a Hope 1032 production. Thanks for listening.